Hello and welcome everyone to the Ross Service Coordinator NOFA webcast. I'm glad to see you out there. Actually, I don't see you, but I'm glad that you're out there. I'm hopeful that you do apply for our Ross funds. As you may know, we have $35 million out on the street, and we're going to go through this webcast and talk to you about the particulars of the program, the different forms, a lot of different pieces to it. And hopefully it'll be a comprehensive presentation, and if you have questions, feel free to call us and you'll get a number at the end. But before I start, let me say that it used to be, up until last year, that Anisi Chenault was sitting next to me or actually doing this broadcast herself. Anisi has taken a temporary assignment to New Orleans, and I'm joined by Deana Lehmann-Kim, who has picked up the mantle about 9 months ago and is doing an awesome job with the Ross and the Family Self-Sufficiency Program. So the two of us are going to be going through this presentation. So, start, the basics. So the due date is March 27th, and I know that March 27th is not very far away. That's the due date. That is not going to change. And 11:59 that day, if it comes in on March 28th, doesn't matter if it's a minute after 12 midnight, it's not going to be received. So what we tell people is that when you submit your application, and of course you're going to be going through Grants.gov, don't wait until March 27th to submit your application. Submit it, I would say 3 days earlier, at least 2 days earlier, in case there's some back and forth, something didn't go through, it's not validated for some reason, you have some time to make good on your application. So that's just a word to the wise, if you will. Again, we have $35 million that will be on the street, and the due date is March 27th. More basics: eligible applicants, housing authority, tribes, resident associations, federally designated nonprofit associations who are supported by a resident association or by a housing authority or a tribe. And we will go into that a little bit to tell you how nonprofits can apply and what the requirements are. Applicants must propose to serve residents of conventional public housing or NHASDA projects. Request. We have a request, and the request is, please read the NOFA carefully. Please read the general section carefully. Many of you are going to call us with questions, and one of our first questions to you is going to be, did you read the NOFA? And if you read the NOFA and you have a problem understanding it or are a little bit unclear, we are more than happy to help you. But if you say, well, you know, I didn't actually read it, then we're going to be a little bit reluctant to help you. Okay, next. The purpose of the Ross program, I'm not going to go through the verbiage that's on the screen. Suffice it to say that the Ross program is a service coordinator program. We expect the service coordinator to, one, survey the residents of your particular development, find out what their needs are, and then connect them to the services that fulfill those needs. So for example, you may find after you do a survey that one of the paramount needs in your development is after-school youth activities. Then the service coordinator's job would be to go to the Boys and Girls Clubs, to the Y, to whoever is providing after-school activities and connect those residents to that service. Or you may find that literacy is a problem. So then you would go to the Board of Education or a community college to find out who can put on a GED program in your development. So that is the purpose of the Ross program, and you see when we get to funding that we're only really funding a service coordinator plus a very limited amount of admin money and training money. The number of applications: housing authorities can submit one application, new or renewal, but not both. So that's one application, and we'll get to how many service coordinators you can apply for. A site-based resident association, one per resident association, 3 as a maximum per public housing authority. So that's 1 per resident association. Nonprofits can receive up to, or can apply for up to 3 grants and may serve 3 separate public housing authorities or resident associations affiliated with those housing authorities. And we'll dig a little deeper on this as well. The number of positions that a housing authority can apply for. Each service coordinator must serve at least 50 units annually. So housing authorities can apply up to for 3 service coordinators depending upon the number of units that they have. If you have between 50 and 1,000, you can apply for 1 service coordinator. Between 1,001 and 2,500, 2 service coordinators, and 2,501 plus, you can apply for 3 service coordinators. If you have 40 units, you are not eligible to apply for a Ross grant. However, and I think we get this into a slide later, if you have 40 units in your development, but the neighboring development has 25, you can add that 40 and 25, come up to more than 50, and you're eligible to apply for 1 service coordinator. So again, the number of positions. A resident association can apply for 1 service coordinator, and you can apply jointly if necessary to add up to at least 50 units, and only 3 resident associations from 1 public housing authority may be funded for new or renewal. And let me just tell you why we have this cap on the number. The first year we had the program out, 1 city applied for 12 service coordinators from 12 separate resident councils. They were all funded, right? Which is great for that city, but it's horrible for cities across the country. So we put that cap in, so now it's 3 resident associations from any 1 public housing authority. The number of positions. Nonprofits can apply for 1 service coordinator per supporting resident association, up to 3 at 1 public housing authority, okay? Or, if supported by the public housing authority, you can apply for the number of service coordinators determined by the number of units. So that if, for example, there are 1,000 units and 1,000 units can apply for 1 service coordinator, if the nonprofit is applying, they can apply for that 1 service coordinator, okay? Nonprofits would need a letter of support from every resident association that they're working with or from the housing authority that a nonprofit intends to serve. We want to make sure that the connection is there between the nonprofit and the resident association or the public housing authority. The number of positions again. In the past, those of you may know that we had a family or an elderly Ross program. We do want you to check a box that will tell us whether you're going to serve families, elderly, or both. This does not at all impact whether or not you get the application, but it gives us an opportunity to count the number of service coordinators who are serving families or elderly. So please check that box. There is a program, the Elderly Disabled Service Coordinator Program. This program came about in the mid-1990s. There were a finite number of housing authorities who received Elderly Disabled Service Coordinator funds. They get it every year. If you're in that pool, you're very lucky. However, you can apply for a Ross Elderly Grant, but you should know that if you receive a Ross Elderly Grant, you will not be eligible for the Elderly Disabled Service Coordination program. Okay, so when you go in and you check that box, if you're checking the elderly box and you receive EDSC funds, know that you will no longer be eligible for those EDSC funds. Okay. Eligible participants. All program participants must be residents of conventional public housing or NAHASDA assisted housing. Section 8 residents are not eligible to be served by this grant. However, there's a caveat, if you will, to that, and I'm going to talk about that in a couple of pages. Coordination. HUD expects that all entities wishing to serve residents at a particular housing authority will have coordinated their efforts prior to applying. So, a resident association from, let's say, Smith Houses decides to apply. The housing authority is going to apply for a service coordinator for Smith Houses. We're not going to fund both. So we're only going to fund one. So please coordinate your efforts. Do not apply for a service coordinator for the same development. Okay, coordination again, and this is what I was referring to 2 slides ago when we talked about that the eligible recipients of services are conventional public housing residents. But remember, this is a service coordination program. So you are going to Goodwill, the Boys and Girls Club, the Workforce Investment Board, a community college, to actually provide the service. So if a health clinic, for example, says, okay, I'll come to your development, I'll do a health fair. It doesn't matter who is served at that health fair. It can be residents of public housing, it can be people across the street, it can be Section 8 residents. Because the health clinic wants to meet with low-income people in need of health services. Similarly, if you go to the Board of Education, the Board of Education says, great, I'll come, I'll set up a class. So they can set that class up and you can fill it with whoever comes to the class. The priority should be residents of public housing, and you should do your outreach to residents of public housing. However, if a person across the street wants to come to that class that is being paid for by the Board of Education, that's fine. However, when you count to us, when you go on your logic model and you count the number of residents served, you cannot count the resident from across the street or the Section 8 resident. Only count public housing residents. Okay? So, the NOFA overview, again, the 2009 grantees are considered renewal applicants. And just a little bit of background on this. When we first put the program together, we thought that what we would do would be to give grants on a yearly basis, and over 3 years, we would cover the number of housing authorities that wanted Ross grants. And then after the 3rd year, we would begin to fund that cycle all over again. So we've held true to that last year so that the 2008 grantees received priority. This year, the 2009 grantees are being considered renewal applicants. All other applicants are going to be considered new. And you will see how that plays out when we go through the priorities. 25% of the funding is reserved by statute to qualified resident organizations. Congress has put this into the Ross legislation for a number of years, saying that, again, 25% of the funding is reserved for resident organization. The grant goes to pay for the salaries of service coordinators, not for the provision of services. And the grant can also pay for administrative costs and training for service coordinators, and I'll go a little bit deeper in a couple of slides on that. The funding structure for each coordinator, the salary can go up to $69,000 per year in salary and fringe, $10,000 each year for admin, and when we talk about admin, we're talking about paper, pencils, computers, chairs, or transportation costs if you have to visit the Boys and Girls Club or you have to visit downtown, etc., right? So that's $10,000 for admin and $2,000 each year for training and travel. We would like our service coordinators to be trained. So that's why this money is there, so that if you're a service coordinator, you can be trained with the latest techniques of service coordination. The 3-year grants, when you total up this figure, would run from $243,000 to $729,000, assuming the 729 figure is if you receive funding for 3 service coordinators. The note here at the bottom is that applicants may propose a part-time coordinator at a lesser salary. However, the minimum number of units, 50, still have to be served. Let me also say that $69,000 per year in salary and fringe, we know that in some cities that $69,000 figure works or maybe is not enough. In some cities, it's way over what the pay scale is. In those instances, we do not expect you to pay $69,000 for salary and fringe. We think that it should be inconsistent with the salary structure in your particular locality. Information for renewal applicants. If you receive funds under the FY 2009 NOFA, you're considered a renewal applicant. If you don't know when it was, because actually the 2009 NOFA, they actually started receiving funds in 2010, you can go to this link, click on the link, and it has a list of all the fiscal year 2009 grantees. So you, the renewal applicants, you can apply to serve the same number of projects, an entirely different set of projects, or a mix thereof. You can also change your budget. A number of service coordinators, assuming that the number of units has gone up or down, the population to be served, the logic model goals, etc. Information for renewal applicants again. If the number of ACC or NHASDA units has changed, you may be eligible for more or less depending upon the new unit count. So if you've gone from one set of numbers to the other, you may get 2 instead of 3 or 3 instead of 2. Renewal applicants may not also submit new applications. Next.
Yep.
Oh, I'm sorry. By statute, I said this already, 25% of the funds must go to qualified resident associations. All resident associations should indicate their resident association status on this form 52768, and resident associations that receive prior funding may not apply for new funding, just renewal funding. Let me just say something about resident associations. For years, 4 years, actually Ross goes back further than that, and this 25% cap has been every year we put out funds, every year up to 25% of the funds can go to resident associations. In no year, never, have we exhausted that 25%, because resident associations, a very small number of resident associations apply. We never hit the 25% mark. We have gone out every year to resident association conferences to talk to residents and say, this money is here. We want to give these funds to qualified resident associations who can perform the functions of service coordination. So housing authorities, we would urge you to talk to resident associations. If there is a qualified resident association that can apply, we would appreciate it if you could talk to that association. When we do our training, we talk about a couple things. One is, start off, who's going to help you write the application? Because as you know from reading the Federal Register notice, it's very complicated. You read it, you glaze. Even though we try very hard to make it very, very clear, sometimes it's not so clear. So the first order of business, what I always say for a resident association is, if you're thinking about applying, get somebody to go through the application with you, whether that's the housing authority, whether it's a community-based organization, a community college, faith-based institution. Get someone to go through the application with you and help you apply. And then we also go through the match, which we'll talk about later. Okay, so I was funded last year. Housing authority, I was funded last year. Am I eligible to apply? Yes, you are eligible to apply. However, we are going to go into, on a later page, the priority lists. So even if you received funds last year, yes, you can apply. We invite you to apply. You will be put in a lower priority because our priorities are resident associations and then renewal applicants, and then after that, housing authorities who have not applied in the past and housing authorities that have current grants. We'll go through that priority list coming up. Okay, eligible activities. For the service coordinator, again, I said the salary and fringe, it goes up to $69,000 per year. The eligible activities, I'm not going to go through all this, but basically, in a nutshell, it's to find out what the needs are of the residents in your development and then link them to the needs. You also are responsible for tracking, for reporting, for assisting. You know, that whole piece is your piece because you're expected to report on a regular basis to HUD on the logic model about the services that you provide. But again, your basic services are to find out the needs and then connect the needs to service providers in the neighborhood. Eligible activities, admin, I talked about this a little bit, $10,000 per year, staff support, local transportation, office supplies, program outreach, rental of space, all of these can be are eligible activities. Also, you'll see there's stipends for reasonable out-of-pocket expenses costs incurred by residents, including transportation and childcare related to program activities. So there is a adult basic ed class, a resident is going with their child. You could pay for childcare services related to that. However, you should note, it's only $10,000. It's not going to go very far, so you have to apportion that money out, and that's up to you to apportion that money out according to this list. Eligible activities, $2,000 for a service coordinator per year, and again, that's because we think it's very important that the service coordinators be trained. Ineligible activities, we had a slide up before. Ineligible activities, everything else. So only those three things, right? Direct services are not eligible. They are not eligible. You want to pay for a job training program? No. You want to pay for an after-school activity? No, right? You want to pay for your FSS coordinator? No, you can't do that as well. Nor can you pay for preparing your application and work and expenses outside the scope and intent of this program. Okay, so I think that's pretty clear. Mm-hmm. Putting your application together, applicants must and we're going to go through three basic things here. You have to show that you have a high quality program. And we're going to show you the actual chart that you have to fill out there, the HUD 52769. But we want to know that that you've identified the needs of your residents that you're going to serve, and that you have a number of agencies that are going to help you address those needs. So we're going to talk about that as well. There also is a 25% match, which you should be aware of. And again, we're going to talk about that later. The 25% match, here we are. You have to show that you have a 25% match. And each of those matches has to be put on the HUD form 52769. This has to be certified by the executive director, the board president. You have to sign the form. That match can be in cash or it can be for in-kind services. Match letters are not required. You do not have to send those match letters to us, but you have to have them. You must keep them on file. If the field office decides that they want to audit your program, they will go and they will look and they will say, where are your match letters? We expect that they will be there. So those match letters are very important. And again, it's 25%. And speaking to resident associations sometimes, if they're applying for what amounts to a $240,000 grant, 25% of that is $60,000. And, where can I get $60,000 of match from? For a resident association, one of the first places I would look is a housing authority. Is a housing authority providing space for you? If the housing authority is providing space, go to the housing authority and say, what's that space, what's the value of that space per month? And the housing authority will give you a figure, whatever the figure is, multiply that figure by 12 months, and then multiply that figure by 3 years. All of a sudden, you're going to find that you have a $20,000 to $30,000 match right there. The job is a service coordinator job. So you're not providing services. You're coordinating to other services. All those other services that you are coordinating with, that's in-kind service. So that if you go to a health clinic and the health clinic says, yes, I'll do a health fair at your site twice a year, you can ask them, what's the value of that health fair? If you were to look in your books, what's the value? And they would say, you know what? It's $2,000 for me to do a health fair. Okay, that's $2,000 times twice a year times 3 years. That's $12,000 a match right there. So the match should not be a problem for you because this is a service coordination grant. Okay, next. Okay, the next part is that you have to show that you have capacity. HUD gives the money out. HUD expects that when we give the money to a grantee, they can perform. So what you do have to do is fill out a past performance narrative of no more than 10 pages. That's required for all new applicants. Renewal applicants do not have to fill out a past performance narrative. So you have to send that in. This, by the way, is the only narrative in the entire application. It's the only narrative. And so we view it very seriously. You have to talk about your performance and let us know that you can actually perform this. You can see more if you look on page 18 of the NOFA. And this past performance is going to be assessed by the local field office or the area office of Native American programs. You might check with them now and say, I'm submitting an application, do you see a problem with me in terms of past performance? Again, so we're going to have more information on this later. The applicants, we're going to get all these applications. Since there's only one narrative, people are checking boxes and they're submitting forms. How do we decide who we're going to give the grants to? It goes in a lottery. So for each category, we'll have a lottery. So for example, I mentioned that resident associations, 25% of the funds have to go to resident associations. If there were enough resident associations that applied, more than the 25%, we would decide who got it by lottery. When we go to renewal applications, all renewal applications may be funded, but it might be a case that we have a lot of renewal applicants and there's not enough money for it. How do we decide? We do randomized numbers and it's a lottery. So that's how it works. The funding priorities. I think we're switching now to Dina Lehmann-Kim.
Okay.
I've given her the hard parts, by the way.
Yeah, Ron, you did a great job. I think you're going to get a lot of reading from me. So, the order of funding priorities basically tells you how we're going to select applications. So the first is qualified resident association renewal applicants that meet policy priority status, and we'll get into how you do that. The second is qualified renewal resident association renewal applicants that do not meet policy priority status. Then new resident associations who would be applying for the first time and who've never been funded before would be put into Lottery 1A. New applicants that get, so number 3 would be new resident association applicants that meet policy priority would be in Lottery 1A. And those that do not meet policy priorities would be in Lottery 1B. Then we go to qualified renewal applications that meet policy priority status, qualified renewal applications from everybody, in other words, PHAs and tribes and nonprofits that do not meet policy priority status. And then I just wanted to make this note because it's in the NOFA, but I thought you should know about it. It should stand out. If there are more qualified, and I'm going to read this, if there are more qualified resident organizations than 25% of the available funding, then the remaining resident association applications will be put together with the rest of the qualified applicants for a second general lottery. Site-based resident associations that were funded in prior ROS competitions may not receive new funding under this NOFA. So we've said that before, I just want to make that clear. However, nonprofit applicants with resident association designation, even if funded in prior ROS competitions, will be placed in lottery category 1 as long as they are applying to serve PHAs that are not currently being served by prior ROS grantees or grants. So that's a lot to process, but please, refer back to that, and if you have other questions, you can always call me. And my contact information will be at the end of this presentation. So continuing on, the second lottery is General Lottery 2A to serve PHAs, tribes without prior ROS funds with policy priority status. General Lottery 2B is to serve PHAs and tribes without prior ROS funds who do not show policy priority status. Then the General Lottery 3A is to serve PHAs and tribes who have had funding in the past by this program, who do show that they meet policy priority status. And finally, General Lottery 3B is to serve PHAs or tribes that are, again, already being served by ROS, but who do not demonstrate policy priority status. So what are the policy priorities? They're basically supporting HUD's strategic plan, and there are 3 that are relevant specific to ROS. Policy priority 1, job creation and employment. Policy priority 4, knowledge sharing and capacity building. And policy priority 5, using housing as a platform for improving other outcomes. Now, you have to realize that in order to qualify for policy priority status, you have to pick 2 of these on your logic model to demonstrate that you will be meeting these policy priorities. So, as I said, you do this with the logic model. And I'm just going to give you one example. The NOFA clearly states how you do this for the other policy priorities as well. So I just wanted to go through it one time. So for policy priority number 1, job creation and employment, step 1, you select under the column that reads services and activities, you select activity output of policy priorities. So it's a drop-down list. It's already pre-populated. All you have to do is find it and then select this one, the activity output of policy priority, job creation, employment, partnership with Workforce Investment Board, or partnership with local unions to establish apprenticeship programs and or job opportunities. Step 2 is then to go under the outcomes column and pick one or more of these outcomes. Again, they're pre-populated, so it shouldn't be too difficult to find them and to select them, and therefore to qualify for policy priority status. So what else is required? There are a number of pieces. We've tried to streamline the application process by not requiring too many narratives, but there are forms that do need to be completed. One is the 52768, which is the ROS application form. So on this form on page 1, you put your name, the tribe, or the PHA tribe or TDHE to be served, the name and PHA code, the number of units that are under your management, whether or not you are eligible to receive EDSC funding, which Ron spoke about before. This past funding cycle, we had several PHAs that erroneously said they were going to serve elderly and disabled populations and were at risk of losing their op fund funding as a result of that. So please really be careful about this when you're applying. And if you are an EDSC eligible PHA, make sure that you say on your application that you'll be serving families only. Then you also can indicate here if you are a resident association. Again, here this form also asks you to check, as I mentioned earlier, whether or not you are eligible for EDSC. And then for resident associations, please make sure that you indicate that you are, if in fact you are. And state and national resident associations applying as nonprofits should also check yes. So here you should make sure well, you need to make sure that you fill out the entire form. And if you're a renewal, you need to check yes. Only fiscal year 09 grantees qualify as renewals. If you have an FY10 or 11 grant and you are applying and check yes, you will be placed in the third lottery category. For this question, are you applying to serve only projects that are not served by current Ross SC grants? Renewal applicants may check yes or no for this. The answer for all new applicants should be yes, because if you are applying to serve projects that are already served, those projects would not be eligible for funding and you would be thrown out of the application, out of the process. Again, 52768, make sure your name and project number are clear, the number of units to be served. Again, we want to see a minimum of 50 for each service coordinator. And this also is where you will indicate if you're serving family, elderly, or both. The chart will serve as your budget. You'll be able to list the position and for each year. And the total grant request at the bottom should be the same as the other form that we require, which is the 52769 and the standard form 424. Here's a sample, and you can see how we've broken it down for up to 3 coordinators. Make sure that you fill out each column carefully for each of the 3 years so that your totals all add up and you would be eligible for the full amount of funding that you could receive. Now we'll turn to the 52769. You can list more than one service provider for a particular need, but make sure that you do identify at least 10 needs and that 50% of those needs have at least one service provider that you've identified to meet that need. And if you, the applicant, are going to be a service provider, you must show the source of your funding, which would not be Ross funding, and the duration of that funding should be for 3 years. And a sample of where you would put this is on this slide here. Continuing on this form, here is where you certify to your match. So make sure that this form does get signed by the appropriate representative who can attest to the match. So I've gotten lots of questions about these 2 forms, and so I thought I'd put a slide up about them. They were, for whatever reason, I don't know why, but they were uploaded as unfillable PDFs. I understand in past years they were fillable. So the workaround is to print them out, scan them. You have an option. You can scan and attach them using the attachments form after you've filled them out. Ideally with a typewriter. I'm sorry to go back to the 20th century, but or by hand. But make sure they're completely legible. Or you can fax them with a fax cover sheet, which is generated by your application. So now we're going to turn to what else is required. Narrative for capacity and past performance is required for new applicants only. Renewal applicants, we will review the forms and materials submitted with this application, as well as all of your prior logic model and budgetary submissions that you've provided to the field office throughout your prior Ross grant. So you don't need to submit anything extra, no narrative pertaining to capacity or past performance in this application. For new applicants, this is what also is required. We'll evaluate the data that you provide, information that you provide in your narrative that relates to capacity and past performance. If an applicant is required to have a contract administrator, then they need to provide information about their contract administrator's capacity and past performance. We will also look at, if you've received other HUD awards, what information you've provided relating to those as part of our review of past performance. And this review will be done at the field office level on a pass-fail basis. If you're a resident association or a nonprofit serving a resident association, you also need to submit the 52753, which is the Certification of Resident Council Board of Election. Also, this is important, letters of support for nonprofit applicants. You're required to submit a letter of support from the organization who you will be representing, basically, or working with, whether it's the RA or the public housing authority that you propose to serve. And letters from resident associations must also be accompanied by a HUD 52753. Now, what needs to be contained in those support letters? The number of eligible units, the list of projects to be served, the extent to which the PHA or the resident association is familiar with you, the nonprofit applicant. It should indicate also that they support your application, and any contact information for the person who's authorized to sign the support letter. For troubled PHAs and all resident association applicants, the contract administrator partnership agreement is required. It's not required, however, for nonprofit applicants, and it's not required for non-troubled PHAs. It's found in the, this form is found in the instructions download, and it's 52755. And you must show on this form that the contract administrator will serve you for the entire length of the grant. If you are in doubt whether or not you're a FOS troubled PHA, make sure you contact your field office to find out and submit one. Doesn't hurt to submit one when in doubt. So for nonprofit applicants, this is something we need, the IRS determination letter to prove your nonprofit status. So what is not required? So no, you don't have to do any separate budgets other than the one that we asked for on the 52768. No other narratives, unless you're a new applicant. You have to, the only thing you have to submit is a narrative for capacity and past performance. Other forms that we required in the past are no longer required, and match letters are not required to be submitted, as we mentioned earlier, but you need to keep them on file. So let's move now to the standard form 424. We recommend that you fill this out first because it'll fill in other parts of other forms automatically. It's found in the application download in the mandatory forms section. If you're a new or renewal, remember only FY09 grantees are eligible for renewal. Question 5A is your PHA code. Question 5B is only for renewals. So if your grant number doesn't end in 09, you are not eligible. You don't have to fill this box in, basically. So question number 9, applicant type is where the GMC will look to determine how to process this application. Are you a public housing authority or a tribe TDHE? Are you a nonprofit, or are you other, which would be for resident association applicants? Questions 10, 11, 12, and 13 are pre-populated, so you don't have to change them. So question number 15, descriptive title of applicant's project. It can be, you know, any town PHA, Ross service coordinator. Just put something in there that describes roughly the project where this is going to take place. The congressional district of the applicant is number 16. Only fill it in if 16B if the project where you plan to implement the program is in a different congressional district from your main office. And this is used to notify Congress so they can talk to constituents about money that they've brought back to their communities. So 17 is your project proposed start and end date. You know, we never know exactly when awards are going to be made, so you can estimate this. You can base it on, you know, say January. That should have been January 1, 2012 or 2013, and then extend it out to 15. And again, this slide should have been corrected. If you are a renewal, you may use the end date of your FY09 grant as the start date. So I'll send out corrected slides, and we'll post corrected slides on the website. Continuing on with Form 424, 18 is estimated funding. 18A is the amount you are requesting. 18B is the amount of your match. All other parts of that question can be left blank. But let's see. Number 19, state review is not required by HUD. Again, moving along on SF 424. Oh no, this is a duplicate, sorry. Yeah, okay, sorry about that. This is the SF 424 supplement. It's the faith-based DEO survey. It's for nonprofit applicants only. If it doesn't apply to you, don't submit it. We know the form is expired from 2009. That's the date that's up on the upper left-hand or right-hand corner, but it's still valid to use. So other forms that are required. So SFLLL, the disclosure of lobbying activities. If it's applicable to you, it's found in the optional documents called disclosure of lobbying, and it's called the disclosure of lobbying activities. The LLLA, again, if applicable, you can either download it from HUD clips or make one yourself. It's basically a blank piece of paper. If it's not applicable, do not move it over, and I'll show you what I'm talking about, and don't send it in. So on this slide, you can see this is the application download, and you can see two boxes where it's the mandatory documents and the optional documents. The one, you just click on them and then click the arrow and then move it over, and that's how you can open up the form. If a form is not applicable to you, you do not need to submit it. So Form 2991 is a certification of consistency with the consolidated plan. All applicants, except for tribes and TDHEs or nonprofits serving them, need to fill this out. It's also found in the instructions download. All applicants need either this one or the next one, which I'll move to, which is the 52752, and that's the certification of consistency with the Indian Housing Plan. Also found in the instructions download. It's so again, either you need this one or the other one that I just mentioned. And make sure you start this process soon, because it's this form and the other form need to be signed by people outside of the PHA. This is I've gotten questions about this. I can't find the 2880. It's in the optional documents on the application download, and it doesn't have a number on the way it's shown on the application download. It's just listed as the HUD applicant recipient disclosure report. This form, it asks for a signature, but it actually is sort of an automatic signature. Just by submitting it, it means that this form has been signed. Sorry, let me see. Okay, so let's go through this. Sorry for skipping ahead. Question 2, threshold determination applies only to this grant application. So answer to question 1, are you applying for assistance for a specific project or activity? Yes. Answer to question 2, have you received or do you expect to receive assistance within the jurisdiction of the department, HUD, involving the project or activity in this application in excess of $200,000 during the fiscal year? It should only be yes. You should only answer yes if you are requesting more than $200,000 for this grant for the first year. Many of you, this could potentially be no. If you answer yes to both of those questions, 1 and 2, you must fill out parts 2 and 3. Most of you may only have to enter, NA in those parts of the form, but still make sure that you complete the form properly. So the next form is the Facsimile Transmittal form, the 96011. So even if you're not sending anything in, you still need to fax that form, use that form, and just indicate 1 for a number of pages, which would be just that for that one cover sheet itself. It's found in the mandatory documents, and it's called the HUD Facsimile Transmittal. The fax numbers are the same as 2011 as last year. And you can see them up on your screen. So let's go through this. Additional note on faxes. Use the form as a cover sheet if you submit any fax attachments, or they will not be read. Entire applications submitted by fax will not be accepted. Use a separate fax cover sheet for each document and fax them separately. If you downloaded the application more than once, make sure that you use the fax cover sheet that came with the version of the application that you ultimately submit. That's very important. If you resubmit electronically, you must wait for validation and then refax all of your faxes. So the logic model, it's found in the instructions download. It's an Excel file. Don't make it into a PDF. You may want to watch a past webcast on the logic model. We didn't do one for FY12. The office that handles it didn't do one for FY12, but you can find prior trainings if you want on webcast archives. And I'll show you how to find those in a little bit. So when you're using the logic model, enable the macros, read the directions carefully regarding the security section, the settings. There are drop-down menus, as I mentioned. Year 1, Year 2, Year 3, and the total page need to all be filled out. The total should reflect all 3 years of the grant. And you know, when you're talking about the activities and the outcomes, they don't have to have a 1-to-1 ratio. So if you say undertake one activity, it doesn't necessarily have to result in only one outcome. It could potentially result in 5 outcomes. So just wanted to make that point. And here's how you can find archived webcasts. So you go to HUD.gov, then you click on resources, and you'll see webcasts at the very bottom of that, that option. And then you click on webcasts, and you'll come to this page. And there you'll see a list of, it'll open up an Excel spreadsheet, I think, and you'll be able to do a search for past webcasts. And there you could find, if you did a search for logic model, you could find, I think, 2 trainings on logic models. So the reporting, the reporting is annual instead of semi-annual. I think in prior years it was semi-annual, now it's just annual, and they'll be due 30 days after the anniversary of your grant execution. So if you sign your grant agreement in May, let's say, then in June of the following year, your logic model would be due. I wanted to make this note as well, that all applicants must submit a code of conduct that has been approved by their HUD field office, unless you're listed on this website as having one on file with us. And the following, none of the following have changed: the executive director of your organization, address, and organization name. So this is also a change from 2009, and we hope one that has simplified your application process. We don't require an affirmatively furthering fair housing statement any longer, because we require the service coordinator to provide that kind of information to residents, and the NOFA provides much more detailed information about how to do this. And we also ask that you document, though, the work that the service coordinator does in this area for your records. Section 3, ROS is subject to Section 3 requirements. There are separate reporting requirements that have been required in the past, which include an annual paper or online submission of the form listed on your screen. The Office of Section 3 is getting serious about this reporting and may impose future penalties for non-reporting, which could include ineligibility for future funding. But please do not send your Section 3 reporting with your application. It's not necessary. So let's go just briefly to the registration process at Grants.gov. There's a 5-step process which can take a while. Hopefully by now you've all registered. But the first thing you have to do is to obtain a DUNS number. Then you have to register with the Central Contractor Registration, the CCR, and you have to register a username and password to obtain the Authorized Organization Representative, and you do this at Grants.gov. Then you obtain the e-business point of contact, and then the AOR confirms his or her status as the authorized applicant to submit an application on behalf of the organization. As this point says, if you haven't already registered, begin your registration immediately. If your AOR has left, follow steps 3 through 5 to have a new one registered and authorized to submit your application. In the past, incomplete registration was the most common error and resulted in applicants not receiving funding. So please make sure that you have done this. Oh, and a word about the CCR. You have to renew this annually because the CCR registration is active for only 1 year. The person who is the organization or the person who's the registrant is notified by email 1 month prior to the registration expiration date that the CCR registration will be expiring, and the email should provide instructions for how to update and renew your registration. But the general section provides a lot more in-depth information about this. So if you have issues or have more questions, please refer to that. Or you can also go to the website that you see on your screen. Okay, so again with the registration process, if you've changed your e-business point of contact in the CCR registration, make sure that the new e-business point of contact has also granted permission to the person submitting the application to be the authorized organizational representative. For your application, to make sure that you go through the checklist that we've provided in the NOFA to make sure that you are including everything that needs to be included for us to be considered a full and complete application. You do not, though, have to submit the checklist. So let's go through the fun process of submissions through Grants.gov. This is some just technical information that you'll also find in the SuperNOFA, the general section, but I'll go over it here just as a refresher. HUD is using Adobe Forms in the Grants.gov application packages. They are compatible with Microsoft Windows Vista operating system, Apple Macintosh computers, and Microsoft Office 2007. The general section has information for downloading the latest version of Adobe Reader. But before you can view and complete the application, you must have a compatible Adobe Reader installed. Some forms are only fillable and not savable unless you have Adobe Professional, and some are also just not fillable. If you have Adobe Professional, you may need to reset your default. Again, please refer to the general section for more information about this. Application forms in the instruction download should be saved to your hard drive, completed, and then attached to your electronic application package for submission to Grants.gov. Do not download the application and save or attempt to upload from a flash drive. It seems that applicants have had difficulty with this in the past. So just save and upload from your hard drive. And another word of caution, if more than one person is working on the application package, they all have to be using the same software version. So this has to do with how to label your attachments. Please label them clearly. Please read the general section for more information on how to name it exactly, using the standards and the conventions that HUD accepts. We ask that you name it exactly what it is, and if possible, with your PHA organization name within the name of the document. For the logic model, use the naming conventions that are in the logic model instructions. File names that are more than 50 characters, and HUD recommends 32, or that contain special characters or spaces, will result in a rejection for a virus detect error. So it's very important that you name your documents appropriately, because failure to do so could result in a rejected application. So in the Grants.gov application package, only the Adobe forms, such as the 424, are identified as mandatory documents. It's sort of it is a misnomer, because other documents like the 52768 and the 52769 are required. As it says here in blue, if the 52768 or the 52769 are missing in their entirety from the application that is processed in the competition, the application will be considered non-responsive, and you as the applicant will be determined ineligible for funding. So please make sure to include those in your application. Again, when attaching documents, use only the formats indicated in the general section. Grants.gov recommends using Internet Explorer to submit applications. If you zip your attachments, use only WinZip. Zip in only normal or maximum options. And again, this information is included in the general section in more detail. The PDFs are only savable if you have Adobe Professional 8.0 or higher. If you do not have Acrobat Professional, which is Adobe, fill out the form and print it out and fax it in with the fax cover sheet. Again, the fax number was in a prior slide. It can also be found in the general section. Please do not fax your application or any parts of it to the program office. And we recommend faxing everything that you attach, just to be sure that we receive it. If you do choose to attach your saved PDF files, please, after you save them, open them back up to see if what you entered is really saved. Again, if you just have the free version of Acrobat Reader, you will not be able to save. You will probably just be saving a blank form. As I've mentioned and Ron has mentioned, the general section has lots of information on registering. When you're going to Grants.gov to download the application package, to go to the download application package page, enter only the CFDA number. Do not put anything in the other boxes. You can also register for updates with Grants.gov. You'll be given that option when you go to download the application and instructions. Watch the Federal Register or HUD's Funds Available page for technical corrections or frequently asked questions. We have posted frequently asked questions there now, so you should be able to find some there. Hopefully by now everybody has registered with Grants.gov. If you haven't, do it right away. Registration checklist and other information can be found at this link. You can also view a webcast on electronic registration and application submission on our website. So now, once you've submitted your application, applicants will receive an email notification confirming receipt and indicating that the application is being validated. The validation process will be completed in approximately 24 to 48 hours, which goes back to our original point about don't wait till March 27th to submit your application. You may, if you want, resubmit your application as many times as you want, but only the last validated submission will be reviewed. If you resubmit again electronically, you must also resubmit all of your faxes. If your application does not pass the validation check, it will be rejected and you will be notified of the reason for the rejected application. Do not assume that the application has been successfully submitted until you receive the validation notice. If a rejection notice is received, you must correct the error and resubmit. If you are rejected and you receive the rejection after the deadline, you will have a 24-hour grace period from your rejection notice to resubmit. You can check your application status on Grants.gov. HUD has received the application you submitted when it says, your application has been reviewed by the grantor agency and assigned an agency tracking number. That means it's been received and validated. So from this point, there's nothing more that Grants.gov can tell you. So all you do now is wait. We want to give you some hints. If there is a problem with your application submission, an email will be sent to the person designated in your registration and not in your application, because we will not have been able to read your application yet. So make sure that the person designated in your registration is checking his or her email in anticipation of a validation email. Make sure that someone will be available to cure deficiencies, both at the time of application submission and during the competition processing time. So processing time could occur or will occur sometime, obviously, after you submit your application. So make sure that there's somebody always available to cure deficiencies. If the point of contact, for example, goes on vacation, make sure there's somebody designated to cover for them. In FY11, the Grants Management Center sent faxes requesting information to cure a deficiency, but also alerted applicants by email that a fax was coming. So if somebody wasn't there, they wouldn't have necessarily found out. So if the fax didn't go through, the GMC sends their notification via snail mail. So we also recommend that you save every email correspondence, email validation, log number, call number to Grants.gov every time you call the Grants.gov help desk, etc. These may become crucial if there is a problem. Also save all fax transmission sheets that your fax machine produces when you fax your documents with your application. If you want help with Grants.gov or need help, you can call that number or go to that website. You can also check their blog spot and try not to call us with Grants.gov problems because we don't manage Grants.gov basically. Here's some additional resources that you can look at. Funds available page, there's lots of good information there. You could also go there via this other route directly to HUD.gov, then click on grants and then funds available. Once you're on this page, you can scroll down to find links to program NOFAs, and you can here also where the page that the program NOFAs are listed on, you can find your FAQs. So these are some reminders from the Grants Management Center, who is the office that is responsible for processing and analyzing all of the applications that we receive. These are the following. These are the non-curable deficiencies. So if your 52768 is missing, or the 52769 is missing, or the capacity or past performance narrative is missing for new applicants, you will not be able to cure your application, and you will be deemed ineligible for funding. So here are a list of curable deficiencies. Basically, I won't really go through all of these, but what we're trying to say here is make sure that the forms are completely filled out. So if it's asking you about your number of units, fill that out. For your project name and the 11-digit project number, which comes from PIC, but we've also included a document that lists all of the projects that were funded in 2009. With the instructions download, you can find that. It's called a PH Development Detail Report, which is as of January 31st of this year. Make sure you include all of the information that we ask for. But if for some reason there's something that's not filled out on the 52768 that you submit, you could potentially cure it. Again, 52769, if you list yourself as the provider, don't forget to indicate a service provider. Don't forget to indicate the funding source and the time period, that who has funded you for that particular activity. It can't be HUD or Ross funding, I should say, and the time period. It has to cover the 3 years of the time period. GMC will not necessarily request a cure, but the match may not be counted, which as a result may result in ineligibility. The value of match in total must equal the total match documented, and on this form, the total grant requested must equal the total grant requested on the other form, the 52768, and the 424. Again, for the curable deficiency, these pertain to the logic model, year 1, year 2, and year 3, and the total. Don't forget that total page. Make sure you complete all the columns, including column 7, which is evaluation tools, sections A through 7. The 2880, part 1, if you answer yes to both questions 1 and 2, you have to complete part 2 and 3. If you indicated yes to both questions in part 1 and have no information to report in part 2 and 3, you must indicate not applicable. Certification of consistency with the consolidated plan. You're required to have this or the Indian Housing Plan. Indicate the name of the program, which would be Ross, and this must have a signature and date, both of these forms. So we've come to the end of this part of our presentation. And if you need to find me, I know lots of you already have. You can send me an email or you can call me. I'm pretty responsive, I think.
Oh, absolutely.
And if I'm not around, my wonderful supervisor, Ron, can be my backup. So we won't be taking any questions at this time. Let me just do a time check. We're at 4:10. So we have posted frequently asked questions on the website. And if you have other questions as you're going through this process, don't hesitate to contact me. Thank you very much, and good luck.
Thank you.
Thanks.
We're in black.